Well, hopefully we'll have an audience here. Oh, there's one. Well, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. We still have a few attendees trickling in, so I think I'm going to wait about another minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. All righty, well, is everybody ready to start? All right then. Well, good afternoon and welcome to this panel discussion on the St. Louis economy during the pandemic. I'm John Posey, Director of Research at East West Gateway. With me are my colleagues Derek Wetherell and Mary Rocchio. Derek will introduce some key data as we go along. And Mary is monitoring our chat box. So if you have questions or comments, use the chat feature and we'll try to work those in towards the end of our conversation. And also with me is a very distinguished panel. Michael McMillan is President and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis, which was founded in 1918 and is the largest affiliate of the National Urban League movement. Examples of his civic leadership and his national recognition are far too numerous to mention, but suffice to say that he has received hundreds of awards and commendations, including recognition by Ebony Magazine as one of the 100 most influential African Americans in the United States. Mr. McMillan recently guided the Urban League through a historic merger with Grace Hill Settlement House, moved its headquarters for the first time in 40 years, and spearheaded the state's largest and most sustained COVID-19 emergency relief effort, providing thousands of families with supplies and drive-through events. And I'm going to ask him more about that as we go along. Steve Johnson is currently the president and CEO of Alliance STL, which helps companies meet location and expansion needs. He has led business recruitment efforts in local, regional, and statewide organizations for more than 30 years. He will soon be transitioning to a new but similar role in Greater St. Louis Inc., and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit more later as well. David Gibson started work as city manager for the city of Clayton in February, after serving for more than 15 years in other local governments in the region, including Wentzville, Richmond Heights, and the city of St. Charles. He teaches city management and public administration as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Missouri St. Louis. He's also the president of the St. Louis Area City Management Association. And finally, Ann Winkler is chair and professor of economics at the University of Missouri St. Louis and is one of the nation's preeminent labor economists. Her textbook, The Economics of Women, Men, and Work, is currently in its 8th edition. And suffice to say that she has dozens of articles in some of the most prestigious journals in the field of economics. East West Gateway produces a variety of reports as part of our Where We Stand series of publications. Each Where We Stand document shows how the St. Louis metropolitan region ranks among the 50 most populous regions in the United States. I encourage you to check out our website, which has tables showing the performance of the St. Louis region on over 100 metrics, over 200 metrics actually, right, Mary? Ranging from economics and demographics to transportation, education, health, and more. So we're here today to explore where St. Louis stands as we enter the 11th month of the pandemic. I'm going to show a couple of slides to set the context, and then we'll turn right to our panel. Um, so the first slide, are we up, Mary? So the first slide shows recession since World War II. The vertical dimension, can we go to the next one? The vertical dimension is going to show employment losses over the course of the recession, and the horizontal will show how many months it took to recover those jobs. In the last recession, the one that started in 2007, at its lowest point, employment was down by more than 6%, and it took 6 years to get those jobs back. So now hopefully we can show the current downturn. There it is. And it's clearly the steepest job loss since the Great Depression. In April, employment was down by about 15%. Most of those jobs have come back, but we're still down by about 7%. And the percentage of jobs lost is still greater than the worst parts of the Great Recession. Next. The recession hasn't affected different industries in the same way. Here's a chart that shows drops in employment. Blue represents February through April, and orange represents February through September. So most industries experienced sharp declines in employment through April, but most of those jobs have come back. Most industries are now in the 5 to 6% range for job losses relative to February. The big exception, of course, is leisure and hospitality, which includes restaurants and lodging. This industry lost half of its jobs by April. And at this point, about half of those jobs have come back, but employment in the industry is still down by about 23%. And the industry also has some smaller sectors that are still struggling even more. And examples of those are movie theaters, bowling alleys, and racetracks. Next. The recession has affected demographic groups differently. Here's the chart for white males. In April, employment of white males was down by about 12%, but most of those jobs have come back. Now it's down by about 4%, at least through September. Black men have had sharp losses and a slower recovery. Now, in September, employment of Black men was down by about 9%. Black women are affected even more. In September, Black women's employment was down by about 11%, and employment for white women is down between 6 and 7%. And here are some other groups. Hispanic women have been affected more than any of the other groups that I'm talking about today, with job losses in September around 12%. Hispanic men are doing a little better, with job losses around, not quite as well as for white men, sorry. Asian women are doing about the same as white women, but employment losses for Asian men are actually greater than those for Asian women. So Black and brown people have been hit harder than whites, and women's employment is affected more than male employment. And with that bit of context, I'd like to start by asking Michael McMillan to reflect a little on the last few months and tell us what have been some of the biggest challenges faced by the families that you serve, and what are you seeing on the ground right now?
Well, thank you, John, for the opportunity to be a part of the panel. Sadly, as you might imagine from the statistics that you just showed, people have been reduced to basic survival. So we have been forced to pivot to help people with food, toiletries, and of course, PPE materials, but also trying to stay in their homes. Rental assistance, mortgage assistance, utility assistance, and to try to find new ways to pivot those that have lost jobs to actually changing their careers to working with companies that are hiring today. You know, as a result of that, and of course, as a result of the need for social distancing and safe distribution of resources, we have had to pivot our community outreach center model that we previously had throughout the region, St. Louis City, County, and East St. Louis, to having these huge drive-through events that we started really towards the beginning of the pandemic and moved throughout the entire region because the need is everywhere. And we have been flooded with calls and emails and texts and direct messages, even on social media, with requests from individuals that when the pandemic had first started, they had jobs, they had careers, they had economic certainty. They had been with some of these companies and organizations for, in some cases, 20 plus years. And then they got absolutely nothing. And so we are seeing people from the airport, from the convention center, from all of the major hotels, from restaurants, and so many different entities that had good paying jobs that now basically have nothing. And so they have been coming through these large scale food distributions that we've been doing. We were able to serve 60,000 people through that effort with the drive-through activities. And then we have pivoted to churches in the community where we're working with 50 to 75 local churches in the communities, quite frankly, that has the highest concentration of the virus and are low to moderate income in communities of color primarily, so that we could assist those individuals that have been impacted the most. And so we've been able to do another 15,000 sets of those food distributions through that, totaling 75,000. But as you see the numbers spiking and you see us having to make more of a shutdown, we're going to continue this for the next 6 months in our minds for the foreseeable future, because the community is going to need it, and the people will continue to need food, need toiletries, need PPE materials to try to curb the virus, and also to try to stay in their homes and not become homeless. I thank the local government and state government assistance that we have received along with others. And also I thank the legislators that have come together and the mayor and county executive in terms of working on these moratoriums on evictions, because if that did not take place, we would have so many people that would be homeless in this community that it would be devastating.
Yeah. Michael, remind me what, is there a geographic area that the Urban League serves?
Yes, so we serve St. Louis City, St. Louis County, East St. Louis, and St. Clair County, but we also partner with a sister Urban League in Alton and Madison. And so we have tried to rotate our activities throughout the entire community, and we quite frankly assist individuals even though they're not in our direct target area. But we have people from St. Charles and Wentzville and other counties that have reached out to us and asked for aid, and we've done our absolute best to give it to them.
Right. Thanks for that information. Steve Johnson, you and your team, I know, are talking to businesses all the time. I'd just like to know, what are you hearing? Are businesses just hunkering down, or are they finding ways to forge ahead? You're muted, Steve.
Right. That's the last time I'll do that today. I do it once every presentation. John, so thanks for including me on this presentation. And this is the part that's a little seemingly at odds with what we see going all around us. And I almost hate to talk about it because, as Michael just outlined, the impacts on thousands and thousands of people throughout the region and throughout the country and the world are very real. I have been surprised at the amount of activity and interest that we continue to see in the marketplace. So I'll kind of go around the horn in a way to get there. So I think everybody's aware that there's a region-wide planning effort going on right now that Bruce Katz is leading. It's St. Louis 2030, a jobs growth plan for the St. Louis region. And you always start off a plan like that with a diagnostic and kind of the state of the community today. And so St. Louis was for St. Louis, we were showing momentum over the last couple of years. So I joined, the Alliance was created in March of 2019. In 2019, as St. Louis kind of came, it seems like we're always slow going into a recession, slow coming out of a recession. But over the last 4 or 5 years, St. Louis had been building momentum, and you can kind of show that by the numbers. But when you look at it from our team, we keep pretty good track of what's in our pipeline, what companies are considering St. Louis for an investment project, and these cannot be just prospects or suspects. These are defined deals that have parameters around them, where the client is saying, we're going to employ this many people, invest this much capital. Here's the type of real estate we need. And here's a timeline. We've got to be able to name 3 out of those 4 before we put it in the pipeline as a active project. 2019 was the best year in 5 years for the team that is now Alliance STL as far as the size of the pipeline and the potential in the pipeline. Now, these are long lead times and a lot of them never happen, but these are real deals in the pipeline. So that was 2019, best year in 5 years. Just this week, and we've still got 6 weeks to go, we have surpassed 2019 in active projects in our pipeline. Now, keep in mind, these have, long lead times. Some of these are, one of them's a $750 million capital investment. And so the build out of that would be long-term. But I have been surprised that the activity has stayed as strong as it has. Now it's changed. Probably 60 to 70% of it is industrial. Very little of it is in applications that require an office environment. Frankly, I don't think anybody understands or would even hazard a guess of what the office of the future looks like. You have companies walking away from their office environment. So that's a long way of getting to an answer that we have been pleasantly surprised. And it gives me a sense of optimism that business is looking forward. They are looking down the road, and it may be 2 or 3 years by the time they would get some of these built, but they are making plans for the future. And we are extremely busy in responding to RFPs and RFIs. What we're not busy doing is entertaining clients who come to town and want to go actually walk across an industrial site or tour a building. We're learning how to do these virtually. Next week, in a couple of weeks, we actually have our first industrial site tour that is totally virtual, where you're trying to explore and show a 200-acre site without being anywhere close to it, and then using aerial photography. And anyway, it's so that part of it's new, but we're still very busy responding to project opportunities. Not a whole lot of people coming to town to look yet.
Right. Well, that's interesting. That's sure not what I would have expected, but it's good to hear. David Gibson, we know that spending habits have changed a lot, for consumers in recent months. And I'd like for you to talk to us about how that's affected city government revenues. What are you seeing in Clayton? And to the extent that's possible, for you to comment on it, how has it affected other cities in the region?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And also congratulations to Kevin O'Keefe, who received an Olga just a little while ago for Lifetime Achievement. He's the city attorney here in Clayton, does a great job. And just wanted to mention that. So as far as the local government impact, there's been a lot of variation from city to city. And it really depends on the types of uses that you have in your city. And really, in the end, we're talking about the more volatile tax, which is your sales tax. So what the impact of the pandemic on sales tax revenue, again, like I said, from city to city it's nuts. If you have a lot of big box stores, if you have a Costco and a Sam's Club and Target and Home Depot, you've actually done really, really well. And I'll talk to other cities. I talk to other cities all the time, but that are actually doing much better in 2020 than they did in 2019. They actually had almost a second holiday season when everybody started to really panic buy in March, and that continued through when everybody kind of hunkered down and stayed at home. So some cities have done really well. Other cities like Clayton haven't fared so well, and really that comes down to, again, our uses here. We don't have big box stores. We have a Straub's location, but we don't have any grocery stores. The kind of retailers that we're seeing a big increase with the pandemic, we don't have any of them. In fact, when you break down our sales tax, 53% of our sales tax revenue is actually derived from hotels and restaurants. And as you said, when you were looking at when we were looking at the job numbers just a minute ago, they're hit harder than any other industry. So for us, it's certainly concerning that we're seeing, I can look out my window, there's not much activity here. The office workers haven't returned. Many of these large corporate headquarters that we have and other tenants in these office buildings, they're saying that they're not coming back until sometime next year. So our restaurants have suffered because the lunch crowd isn't there. There isn't anybody parking in the streets, so our parking revenue's down. Really, our revenue's down almost across the board. So we're particularly hard hit here in Clayton with the pandemic, and I'm not sure really what the recovery will look like, because we, like Steve just alluded to a minute ago, we don't know what the future of office occupancy looks like. And so really that's the driver here. We need people in these office buildings. We need people flying to St. Louis and staying in Clayton to meet with the individuals that work there, going out to lunch, going out to dinner. All that has really stopped. And so it's been pretty painful for us. I can say that the County CARES Act distribution certainly helped. And then really across the metro area, what happened initially in March was everybody just started slashing expenses like crazy. Everybody took a deep dive into their budget, really going line by line, looking for savings, because we all knew that this would be a difficult time. So the combination of deep cuts to expenditures and the CARES Act money that we actually received helped us balance out 2020. However, we're, at least in Clayton, anticipating a deficit around $1.3 million for the 2021 fiscal year that started on November 1st. That's probably actually going to be a little bit worse now that we've got the current restrictions in place, but we'll continue to adapt to that as it goes. But again, I'll talk to another city that'll say, hey, we're doing really well. Sales tax is great. We're having an up year. So from city to city, there's just a wide variety. I will.
I seem to have lost. Are you there, David? Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you, David.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sorry that we lost David, but I'd like to turn to Ann Winkler and first of all, just invite you to comment on anything that you've heard. But in particular, I've heard it said that this is a she session. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm also pleased to be part of the panel today, so thank you. And I got to say that Steve's comments were encouraging. So, you know, I think we're looking for good news where we can find it. So I think that's really good for the St. Louis region. Yeah, in terms of job loss, I think the national media and I think the Post-Dispatch to a lesser extent has picked up that the nature of the recession that we're in is really different than the past recessions that we've been in. And it has been called a she session. So in the past recessions, they've been very cyclical based. And so it's really been construction, manufacturing, trade, transportation, those sectors that are heavily male dominated that have been largely affected. And what makes this situation very different is the sectors that have been affected. And so we've really got a confluence of events here. We've got the health crisis. We've got so much of the business shutdown, especially with the non-essential services and with the leisure and hospitality sector. We've got a childcare crisis. And with the confluence of these events, we saw that initially, of course, the national unemployment rate, I think you talked about being close to 15%. And at the time, initially, a much higher unemployment rate for women than for men. And although those rates right now are they're pretty similar for women and men, still we've seen a much greater withdrawal of women from the labor force than we've seen for men. And really for women, a number of things are going on. Women are a larger fraction of workers in leisure and hospitality, so that's going on. A smaller share of women have been able to transition to remote work, so that's a factor. In early summer or so, we saw government being hit in terms of a sector, and a larger share of women are in state and local government. We've seen education-related jobs being hit. There's a childcare crisis going on, and that's contributed to, if you're trying to oversee homework, you're trying to take care of other kinds of childcare responsibilities, that largely falls on women. So the impact has been experienced very much by women. And I also would say, as you showed in your slides, John, women, and also especially disproportionately for women of color. And we saw that in the slides that you showed.
Now, we've talked about effects on workers. Do we know anything yet about the effects on children? And I have the digital divide in mind as I ask that. Is that playing a role?
Yeah, the digital divide is absolutely, I think, one of the huge issues that we face. I mean, certainly in the St. Louis MSA, but if you looked much more broadly across the whole state of Missouri and really across the United States, the digital divide is huge. Also, in terms of learning for kids with special needs, for kids from less advantaged backgrounds, the remote learning poses a significant challenge. There's important research that shows that investments in young children have the hugest payoffs. So I think that there is considerable concern about short run impacts, but really long run impacts on human capital, on the acquisition of skills that we really need. And that could have, effects down the road.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
Well, I'd like to dig a little deeper into St. Louis's unique strengths and challenges. So I'm going to ask Derek Wetherell to come on in and share some information that he's collected. And take it away, Derek. You're still on mute, by the way. Are you with us, Derek? Still on mute, Derek.
Unmuting. Okay. How's it going?
Great.
I am Derek Wetherell, research analyst at East West Gateway. And today I'm presenting data on how employment has changed since the start of the pandemic in the United States and how it compares to this time last year. Additionally, I'm going to drill down a little bit and provide some more specifics on how different industries and demographic groups have been impacted in St. Louis. My first slide shows how employment has changed relative to February and how St. Louis compares to the United States and other peer regions. The table shows data for the 50 most populous metropolitan statistical areas in the United States, which we refer to as the peer regions. In both the table and the graph, dark orange indicates St. Louis, dark purple indicates the United States, and the light purple indicates the Midwest peer regions. The table shows the percent change in employment from February to September of this year. September is the most recent month for which we have employment data available. And it shows that St. Louis is faring better than most other regions, ranking 11th among the peer regions and having a slightly smaller decrease than the United States as a whole. In St. Louis, over this time span, employment has declined by 4.4%, or roughly 60,000 jobs. In an average year, the region would typically gain around 29,000 jobs over the same time span. Since the start of the pandemic, April has been the worst month for employment across all regions. In St. Louis, from February to April, the decline was 10%. And this followed the implementation of stay-at-home orders, school closures, and other social distancing policies. So St. Louis had the smallest decline among the Midwest regions in the United States. And it was followed by a less dramatic increase in employment, in part because of the smaller initial decline. The smaller decline followed by the slower recovery, as Steve pointed out, is similar to what the region experienced during the Great Recession. Another way to assess how the economy is doing is to look at employment this year compared to last. In this slide, we show the percent change in employment from September 2019 to September 2020. All peer regions in the United States have experienced declines in employment from last September. The decline in St. Louis was about average compared to the other peer regions and slightly smaller than the nation as a whole. As seen in the table, St. Louis had a 5.9% decline in employment, ranking 23rd among the peer regions. Overall, the region has 85,000 fewer jobs this year than last. In the map, you can see some regional clustering for the most part. Regions that have had more days under stay-at-home orders or have larger leisure and hospitality industries have had larger declines in employment. The regions on the West Coast and in the Northeast are more purple, indicating larger losses of employment. Generally, regions in the South have experienced smaller losses, as indicated by the orange. Two exceptions to this, you'll notice, are New Orleans and Orlando. These two regions have larger leisure and hospitality industries and rely more on travel than other regions, and are more similar to Las Vegas in that regard. From September 2019 to September 2020, the leisure and hospitality industry has had the greatest decline in employment in the United States and among the peer regions. The industry typically depends on large groups gathering in indoor spaces, activities that have been restricted by the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing policies. The bar graph in this slide shows the percent change in employment by industry for the St. Louis MSA. In the region, there are 33,000 fewer leisure and hospitality jobs this year than last, a decline of 21.6%. Just two industries have experienced employment gains over this time frame: financial activities and other services, which have added 1,000 and 1,700 jobs respectively. While we don't have local data that tells us how different demographic groups have been impacted by during the recession, we can look at what industries people are employed in. What we find is that in the St. Louis region, Black workers and women workers are disproportionately employed in some of the more impacted industries. This suggests that the region is likely to see a similar trend as the United States as a whole, with white male workers faring better than most others. Black workers in St. Louis as of 2019 were employed at a 54% higher rate than white workers in the healthcare and social assistance industry. They're also disproportionately employed in the most impacted industry in the region, leisure and hospitality, with nearly 12% of Black workers employed in the industry compared to 8% of white workers. Women workers are also employed at higher rates in several highly impacted industries. As of 2019 in St. Louis, nearly a quarter of all working women were employed in the healthcare and social assistance industry, making women more than 4 times as likely as their male counterparts to be employed in the industry. Additionally, they were employed at twice the rate of men in the education industry. As for the leisure and hospitality industry, women and men were employed at similar rates in 2019, 9% to 8.8% respectively. So how does this data align with what people are experiencing in St. Louis? Well, for that, I'll turn it back over to John and our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Derek. I think I'd like to turn to Steve Johnson next. And Steve, just thinking about how St. Louis compares to other regions, do you have a sense for how the whole pandemic experience has affected the competitiveness of the St. Louis region vis-a-vis other peer regions?
So the best I can give you, John, is just my gut, I think, on that. And I don't think it has helped or hurt us. And some of it all depends on who you talk to. There's some theories out there that there will be an out-migration from some of the really large metropolitan areas on the coast. Some of the early demographics or some of the early migration patterns I see suggest that might be true. And this is me, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. So I mentioned earlier that we don't see many office related projects. Within the last 3 or 4 weeks, we have opened 2 very significant office-related projects after 6 months of seeing none. We've opened 2 that are very significant. Both are, I guess, they call them in their Fortune 500 type companies with their back office operations. As is typical, we're working these through a third-party consultant, so we don't know who they are. We take the consultant at his or her word. They they may be part of that pattern. We don't know that yet, but I suspect that could be some of it.
You know, you're talking about the site selection consultants. Most of us have never had the experience of working with a site selection consultant. Could you just give us a sense of what kinds of questions they ask? And I guess I'm curious, do they ask about the region, or are they really focused on site specific stuff? Could you just give us a peek behind that curtain?
Yeah, it's different for each and every one. I will tell you that just a rule of thumb, at least 50% of the projects that we work with are represented by a third-party specialty consulting firm. And this can be anything from a one-person operation to some of the major, the global accounting firms have site selection practices with them. And they'll focus, and they just, companies don't do this very often, so they engage people who do. Obviously, these are important people to us because we know where to find them. We know how to stay in touch, and one firm or one individual can represent several opportunities over the course of years. The questions are far-flung. The hardest questions to answer, and the ones that are getting more and more specific and challenging to respond to, are all related to talent, which I think you can surmise what is the driving element behind most projects by those questions. But they want to totally understand the talent situation in the market. Is it there? If it's not, is it being trained for? Can it be recruited? Will people move? It goes far beyond just what are the wages for this particular industry. You can look that up, but they really dig deep into understanding talent, and then we have to go to existing businesses to help answer those questions, which then presents a dilemma to them that how much
Right.
how much access do they give them behind their curtain, knowing that this could be a company that comes in and competes with them.
Right.
And I will tell you, probably going on more than you wanted here, but on this issue of talent, and especially for projects that are pretty significant in the numbers, this is where our slow growth rate really does hinder us, because a fast population growth rate just, I sometimes say, covers a multitude of sins. I mean, there are going to be more people there, and so we don't have that luxury.
Right. Thanks, Steve. Michael McMillan, as you talk to your counterparts around the country, do you have a sense for whether St. Louis faces unique challenges, or do we have unique assets? I guess I'm wondering, how is our plight similar to or different from other regions? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So the National Urban League regularly convenes meetings of CEOs and workforce staff across the country to talk about the various issues that we're facing in our local areas. And I would say that, sadly, the statistics that you have put up already in terms of this Zoom, in terms of looking at what Derek provided us, shows itself to be the case across America. So Black and brown people have been disproportionately affected economically by this crisis, along with women in every single market across the country. And for those markets that have high concentrations of travel and leisure, they have been impacted even more so than we have from an economic devastation standpoint. So I would say St. Louis is, once again, in the middle, right? We're not at the forefront and we're not at the low end in terms of how these types of crises impact us. When there's a boom, we don't really feel it first. And when there's a recession, we don't really feel it as bad. So, being in the middle does have some advantages, but when you look at the future, hopefully what we will be able to do as a community is to be able to, as Steve mentioned, pick up the pace, get those jobs back, get the economy going again, get those people that, really need the help, the assistance in the next stimulus package, but then also prepare ourselves as a region for growth and economic stability from not only an economic standpoint with revenue and jobs, but also with a population growth as we look at the census and going over the next 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. Ann Winkler, do you have any thoughts on how the recession has affected St. Louis compared to other regions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Derek's map was really instructive because it really shows that, for example, you go and you look at somewhere like Nevada, the Las Vegas area, I mean, has just been hit tremendously. Hawaii hit tremendously. As Michael just said, we are somewhere in the middle. We're somewhat, I mean, on the bright side buffered. I mean, we've got to look for the bright spots best as we can find them. And so, for example, the national unemployment rate in April hit 14.7%, but in the St. Louis MSA, it topped out at 11.6, and our rates come down a lot. The most recent numbers for September, but our St. Louis rates at 5.8%, the national rates at 7.9%. So we're doing somewhat better. I would just say, keeping my economist hat on, unemployment rates are potentially misleading, especially in a crisis like this or in the Great Recession, because to be included as a person who's unemployed, you have to have searched in the recent past, technically in the last 4 weeks. And if you haven't searched, you're not even in that unemployment statistic.
Right.
So I think that, those are useful as comparators if we're looking at St. Louis versus the nation. But in terms of the depth of pain, unemployment rate is missing the full impact of what's happening.
Yeah.
At least the official rate that, is reported generally.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Mhm.
And David, I think we lost you for a minute or two there, but happy to have you back. So I'm interested in any thoughts you have on how the St. Louis region compares to other regions, but I also, Steve Johnson mentioned that he has a lot of projects in the pipeline. I just wondered if you could comment also on how the recession has affected development projects in the region.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, sorry about that. I had a computer blackout that required a restart, but I'm back. It's just one of those Zoom things. As far as the region's concerned, what we saw here was, and I think the information that Dr. Winkler and Steve and Mike presented are really true for local governments as well. It's highly regionalized what the impact was. Really has to do with your core industries there, or your sectors. The one thing though, from a local government standpoint, when we compare really the Missouri side of the river to, and this is statewide, not just the St. Louis area specifically, but to the rest of the country, and the economic impact of the pandemic on local governments. What really stands out for us is the fact that we don't have any kind of enabling legislation related to the Wayfair decision that allows municipalities and local governments to collect online sales tax. Missouri and Florida are the only two states that don't have it. And I'm not trying to be political at all, but it's just a fact that in the end, what happened was when people shifted their behaviors when they were at home with these stay-at-home orders, they started to buy things online at a lot faster rate than they had previously, and we weren't able to capture any of that revenue. And so in other areas of the country, really almost every other area in the country, that wasn't the case. And so when there was an uptick in the online sales, they were actually their taxes weren't really declining. They were able to capture that. So I think that is one thing that sets us apart. Hopefully, progress is made in that area because we really saw the impact, I think, through the pandemic that has on us. So just wanted to point that out. But as far as development's concerned, Steve's absolutely right. There's still a lot of activity here in Clayton. We have a very large office project that was approved and really broke ground during the pandemic. And obviously it's still going, but construction's ongoing with that. They hit it with a full head of steam. We just approved a hotel, believe it or not, just a few weeks ago. So, that's kind of an outlier because that's one of the industries where we're just not seeing much activity. Retail development has slowed, hotel development has slowed. However, single family homes are still going up at a really fast rate. That has to do with the low interest rates, I would presume. Multifamily development is still really strong, really across the region. We're seeing a lot of that, and a lot of mixed use developments. So a lot of these developments at this point, if you want to do multifamily or condos, a lot of times we're seeing a mixed use component with maybe some commercial on the first floor, but it's the large scale retail and that have really slowed down. And office, everybody's just kind of in a wait and see mode. And I think when my screen went dark on me, What I was actually talking about with Clayton is just the uncertainty that goes along with people returning to offices. What is that going to look like? Because
Yeah.
obviously to us and in the city and in downtown St. Louis as well, it's absolutely critical. So that's one of those things that's going to be slow to cover, and we'll just see where it goes from here.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that information. So in a minute, will probably be our final segment, but in a minute, I'm going to ask the panelists to share how their organizations are responding to the pandemic. But first, I'd like to turn to Ann Winkler and ask if you're willing to gaze into a crystal ball for a moment. Where do you think all this is headed? Where employment trends are unemployment trends headed?
Yeah, wow. Well, I feel like, I think the good news is that St. Louis has been more buffered. So I try to think of silver linings. I do think that in our region, there's just look at the new St. Louis County orders. COVID is rebounding, whether, it's defined as the second or the third wave, it doesn't matter. It's here. And David was talking about what's happening in terms of the restaurants and the dine-in and all of that and what's happening there. Those are real effects. So I think that we have seen, there's no question, we've seen some recovery from the initial enormous losses back in April. I mentioned before, they hit women more than men and minority individuals more than others. But I think that while things have been looking better, my crystal ball says that I feel like they're not going to look as rosy in the next couple of months. I think that with the renewed shutdown orders, and also I think somebody else was talking about the stimulus, the role of the stimulus before through the CARES Act, but we haven't had another stimulus. And I think that's important. That's important for consumer spending. Consumer spending feeds into what's going to happen into city and local government and those coffers there. So I think that it really depends also on what happens between December and January with respect to some sort of major legislation being passed. So unfortunately, I feel like there's more job loss to come, but it could be tempered with a new stimulus package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Ann. Michael McMillan, we've talked a little bit about the Urban League's response. Do you have more you'd like to add on that? And in addition, thinking about the future, where do you think we're going from here?
Well, John, we are going to continue to take everything that we've done for 102 years and raise it to the highest level possible. This coming weekend and next week, we will be doing our 23rd annual Thanksgiving distribution of meals to low to moderate income communities. And as opposed to doing our typical 2,000, we will do 6,000 and
Wow.
continue on with our outreach into the areas that need it the most. Thus far this year, we've been able to pass out over 300,000 masks into the communities that need them the most. We're going to continue that effort because obviously the virus numbers are spiking. They're not going in the right direction. They're going in the absolute wrong direction. We will continue not only with the food and toiletries and masks, gloves and sanitizer, but also the rent and mortgage assistance, utility assistance, helping individuals that would like to be able to send their children to Head Start, where we serve children from 0 to 5 years old so that they could hopefully then go back to the workforce if they have the opportunity to do so. We'll continue these large scale distributions and everything that we're doing, but we're also going to focus as much as we can with other partnerships on some economic development and some housing development in these low to moderate income communities that need it as well and need a rebound more so than even general society. And the other part to this that really, quite frankly, is very encouraging, as we wrap up today's session in terms of looking at where we need to go as a community. If you ever get a chance to come out and be a part of one of these large scale distributions, you'll be proud of the fact that you have 250 individuals on average, Black, white, and all races, young, old, middle-aged, rich, poor, and middle income. And so we bring everyone together as a bridge to try to make St. Louis one community with one goal of helping the people that need it the most. And that is what really our region should be all about. And so that's what we will continue to do and take it to an even bigger and better level this year and in 2021.
Well, thanks for that information, and thanks for everything you're doing for the community. Steve Johnson, there are big changes afoot in the economic development world. Can you give us a little briefing on that?
I have no idea what you're talking about. So some of you may have read in the press over the last couple of weeks that starting January 1, a new organization will exist by the name of Greater St. Louis, Inc. Greater St. Louis represents the merger of 5 civic organizations, us, Alliance STL, the St. Louis Regional Chamber, Arch to Park, Civic Progress, and Downtown STL are all converging and coming together under one banner. It's a concept that has been in discussion off and on for a long time. I've been in St. Louis 16 years, and I've heard the concept discussed. It's got a little more traction a few years ago. During the pandemic, all 5 of the organizations, well, 4 of the 5 ended up on the same floor in Met Square and just started seeing the opportunities and the advantage of working together and just bumping into each other in a socially distant way, of course, and just what all that could mean. And so I think what's interesting is one of the things that people who are, inside St. Louis, I've sometimes said we haven't always played well together. And so the fact that we can make a big statement like this about defragmenting, if you will, the civic infrastructure and coming together as the business and civic community to really to speak with one voice and take on big projects and have a big, bold agenda is, I think, exactly the right thing for St. Louis to do right now. This is not the result of a pandemic and everybody getting squeezed. That may have hastened it a little bit, but that is not what this is about. This is about taking on a bold agenda that many of you have probably been involved in some of the work that Bruce Katz is doing right now with the St. Louis 2030 plan, a jobs plan, a plan that is very much about inclusive growth over the next 10 years, a plan that is about putting the urban core as a central area of focus. I mean, it's a regional plan. We represent 15 counties on both sides of the river. But if you look at metropolitan areas that grow, they always have a strong urban core. And we have to make that a priority if the rest of the region is going to grow. So, I use the word unapologetic in saying, I mean, that doesn't mean that's the only thing, but it's an important thing. And if we're going to grow as a region, we have to get that figured out. And so I'm excited about the opportunities that it will provide for the region. It's some of the senior leadership of the business community stepping up and pledging their time and treasure to make this work. And I think it's a good thing. And I just, it will be exciting to see the impact that this can have. It won't be overnight. We don't have the answers to all the questions on day one, but.
And so what's the timeline for making the merger official? What's that?
January 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So all right. Well,
we're working on a lot of the everything related to the integration right now, and
okay.
it goes live January 1.
Okay.
And a lot of the agenda will be driven by the work that Bruce Katz and his team and about over 100 people throughout St. Louis have been part of putting that plan together, and the plan will be public and disseminated widely for public input and feedback over the next couple of months. And it's time to get to work.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. I think you're right. It's a big plus for the region. And David Gibson, I think I'm going to give you the last word here because we're nearly out of time. can you talk about how local governments are responding to the pandemic, and has the pandemic affected the way that local governments do things?
Oh, absolutely. So on a really micro level within communities themselves, you've seen people come together really like they haven't before, which is great. I think our neighborhoods here are stronger than they were. There was a big sense of community pride, really city to city. So you saw things like, there wasn't as much traffic. So officers got on bikes and started riding through neighborhoods, just kind of talking to people, of course, from a distance. We had, New Orleans style second line parades going through neighborhoods. We had food trucks coming to neighborhoods to basically drop off food, and everybody did that in a socially distanced way. But really all these kind of fun things popped up where everybody was seeking the sense of community because they couldn't go out and do things. And a lot of that has stuck around, and I think it will. And so I see on the micro level that, communities have really been strengthened in a lot of areas with this. On a more regional basis, on a regional level, there's a whole lot more collaboration and cooperation between cities. Not that there wasn't before. There's always been things like, for instance, Clayton provides IT services to Richmond Heights and Brentwood, and I don't think most people know that. There's different park collaboratives. There's centralized where cities collaborate on that. There's always been those types of things operationally, but when the pandemic started, what we saw was mayors through the municipal league and city managers through SLACMA and informally too, reaching out to one another, trying to figure out how to make things more efficient. Where were they making cuts within their budget? How were they changing policies? What were we going to do with outdoor dining to help our restaurants and help our businesses? And so everybody just kind of formed this very large network, this information network. You would see a policy that was drafted in some cities circulate between all these other cities. And, in the end, what I think we're going to see, again, on a micro scale is stronger communities because people came together, and on a larger scale, I think we're going to see a lot more cooperation. I see that spirit of cooperation continuing from city to city. I've had some really encouraging and interesting conversations just within the last few weeks about, just opportunities down the road to work more with other cities and make things more efficient. So I think that's going to be a byproduct of all of this, and certainly a positive thing. So once we get through these acute financial issues, I think just operationally speaking, I think we're going to be in much better shape on the other end of this. So that's my take at this point.
Well, it sounds like at least a couple of you have given us at least a couple of small silver linings in this very challenging year. So on that note, I would just like to give my deep thanks and appreciation to the panel for joining us and for sharing your insights today. And to everyone who joined in, I thank you for joining us. We wish you all a happy and safe Thanksgiving. And so panelists, thanks again and take care.
Thank you.
All right. Are we off?